Good day, duelists, and welcome to the first of many Duel Masters deck profiles. In this video, I'm going to be showing you a deck I like to call Red Paladin, or more commonly known as simply Fire Aggro. This is one of my favorite decks to bring to general competitive environments, as it does decently against pretty much anything, or in other words, its matchups are not all that polarizing, at least when compared to other similar lists. Now, Fire Aggro is not a new concept, it's probably been around from as early as the game was released, but this list right here is thanks to a Romanian player by the name of Pitikman, who won a bunch of big tournaments with it, and I myself had some decent performances piloting it, including 2nd place in IDC 45 and 3rd place in the most recent webcam tournament, the VOD of which I will also be uploading here very soon. So what does this deck do? Well, it's a fast deck, but not overly so. On a deck speed scale, I'd say it sits somewhere between Fire Nature Rush and the classic red, blue, green aggro. It kind of combines the best of both worlds from these two decks in that it rushes the opponent down while having many answers for annoying things like blockers, and at the same time not running out of steam thanks to the great resource generation. That is to say, you want to end the game early, but sometimes you can also play the long game, and even when it seems hopeless, snatch a victory from the jaws of defeat. Alright, let's talk about the cards. First of all, the aggro core, Deadly Fighter Braidclaw, Cook Polon, and Snip Striker Bullraiser. These are the creatures that will be throwing in the early punches. Deadly Fighter, of course, needs no introduction, comes out on turn 1 and starts swinging. Do note that because it's forced to attack and hence give your opponent card advantage, sometimes, situationally, it might be better to hold off on it, especially if you expect your opponent to have a blocker. For example, in a short I posted recently, you might have noticed that I had Deadly Fighter turn 1, but I decided to charge it and pass instead because I expected my opponent to have something in response, and sure enough he had a blocker in the form of Sarius, so playing the Deadly Fighter the turn before would have just given away one card for free. Next up, Cook Polon. This card is absolutely insane in the aggro mirror, and it is one of the main reasons why this deck does so well against other aggressive decks. We'll talk a bit more about matchups in a minute, but yeah, the fact that it can be attacked means that it can just take a shield every single turn without retaliation. Your opponent has a Gonta, Cook Polon doesn't care. And Snip Striker is, well, it's a 2 mana 3000. Good power ratio, but can only attack if you have more creatures than your opponent, which is a drawback. In general, you will have more creatures because you are the aggressor, but it will definitely come back to bite you in the ass sometimes. While Cook Polon is better against aggro, Snip Striker shines against control decks which don't play that many creatures, and it is one of this deck's few lines of defense against Burst Shot, a very popular card in the Duel Masters meta. Now, 8 2-cost creatures is just a bit too few. Ideally you'd want at least 10, so to complete this package we're using 2 Rikaboo Screwdriver, an excellent card against decks that rely on blockers, which these blocker decks will in general destroy rush decks, but not this list, because of this Screwdriver card as well as some others we'll see a bit later. Do note that these 2-drop slots are flexible. If you're expecting to not face all that much aggro, you can maybe take out the Cook Polon and put in an extra Screwdriver, especially if you think you'll be going up against many blockers. And to complete the Fire Aggression package, we have 6 speed attackers. In this version, I choose to run 3 Pyrofighter Magnus and 3 Rikaboo the Dismantler. Some lists might run 4 of one and 2 of the other. Again, these slots are flexible. Both of these speed attackers have their upsides and downsides. Rikaboo stays on board and can attack once more if it's not dealt with, while Magnus has more power and retreats to the safety of your hand to once again take more shields on the following turn. Speed attackers are absolutely vital to any rush strategy, so it's no surprise to see them here. Some of you might be asking why don't we run a full complete playset of each? Well, because there's simply no space for 8 of them in the deck, but trust me, 6 do the job well enough. Now let's move on to the water section. While the fire section is full on aggression, a match that shines bright but burns out fast, water by contrast gives the deck options, removal, and longevity. First of all, Aqua Hulkus. Of course this card had to be in here, it's a cheap creature that draws you a card, crazy efficient, you'll see it in every single aggro or mid-range water deck out there, no need to talk about it too much. And to help with our card draw, we also have 2 copies of Lucky Bowl. If you thought drawing 1 from Hulkus was good, wait until you draw 2 from this card. Lucky Bowl is one of the elements that make this deck so scary to go up against because it plays things and it plays things and it plays more things, and once they finally played enough things and you think they've run out of steam, all of a sudden this bow things hits the board and they've completely refueled, while at the same time putting a body on board to keep up the pressure. Now of course you need your opponent to be at 3 or fewer shields for the effect to go off, which ideally will be the case since you are playing a rush deck, but not always, especially not by turn 4. shield generation via cards like Sky Sword can hurt Lucky Ball a lot. This is part of the reason why it's only a 2-of in this deck. That and, well, a 4-mana card is considered expensive for a rush list. This is pretty much the top end of the deck and you don't want too many copies of it to clog up your hand. Now onto removal. Returning cards to hand is the name of the game. You don't really care about destroying their creatures, you just want to get them off the board. So most of the time bouncing them to hand achieves the same purpose, just for much less mana. And sure, they can replay the creature next turn, but they have to spend mana on it again, which might be a tempo loss your opponent cannot afford when they are losing 2 to 3 shields per turn. So to that end we have of course Spiral Gate. Gets anything off the board for just 2 mana. The fact that it's so cheap means you'll probably have some leftover mana, which means you can develop a creature at the same time to keep up pressure, or for example, play a speed attacker while bouncing their blocker to push for game. Next up, Aqua Surfer, yet another reason why this deck does so well against other aggro decks. If this is hiding behind your shields, it's pretty much game over. I mean, you're getting rid of one of their things and developing a creature that can also attack right away, there's almost no coming back from that. Notably, with 4 surfers in the deck, if you run the numbers, there's about a 50% chance that at least one will be in shield, so pretty decent odds. And of course sometimes you will have it in hand, which is not great, but I mean, some cards gotta go to mana anyway, don't they? And sometimes when it comes to the late game, you might even hardcast it from hand to bounce a blocker or something similar. And lastly, to round up the bounce package, we have of course Unicorn Fish, just a very efficient card. Bounce is something for cheap while developing a body, and let me tell you, this card makes it pretty much impossible to play against this deck from behind. Like, you're facing a board of creatures and you're thinking, it's alright, I'll play this big blocker to hold them off. Then they play Unicorn Fish and you're back in the same spot, except now you're a couple of shields down and facing even more creatures. Finally, you have 4 Hawkers and 4 Surfers already. All of these are liquid people and they allow you to play the finisher and namesake of the deck, one of my favorite cards in Duel Masters, Crystal Paladin. When summoned, Paladin bounces all blockers and can attack right away unobstructed, which means against this deck you are never safe. Like against most aggro decks, you can usually fight off the early aggression and eventually stabilize, play 1 or 2 blockers, maybe more, and there's that moment when you can sigh in relief and go, okay, I have my wall, I'm safe now, I can start developing my own threats and trying to end the game. But not against this deck, because Crystal Paladin can always come out of nowhere and ruin your day. And to help with that, we have 2 deck slots left that we didn't talk about, and they are filled with Aqua Guard, mostly just to have an evolution bait for the Paladin. It allows you to threaten Aqua Guard into Paladin as a 5 mana game ender from hand, and is also kind of nice against other aggro decks sometimes. I mean, there's nothing more satisfying than facing a turn 1 Braid Claw and replying with a turn 1 Aqua Guard. And that's the list. We covered every single card in the deck. Let's talk about a few cards that are not in there. I know this will come up in comments a lot, especially from players that have maybe not played Duel Masters too competitively, but Coral. Why is Coral not in the deck? And the simple answer is, there's just better cards. Coral's effect reads, you put 1 creature to the top of your opponent's deck, but an equivalent way to read it is, return 1 creature to hand, and then they skip their next draw. And when you look at it like that, I mean, the skip the draw part, you don't really care about it that much. Your opponent already has a lot of cards in hand since you are presumably breaking many shields early on, so how much do you really care about denying them resources? So you're left with the return to hand part, which Unicorn Fish just does for 1 mana cheaper. And look, I'm not saying the draw skip is worth it, it's nice sometimes, but it's just not worth giving up the 1 mana discount Unicorn Fish provides, at least not for this deck. Another interesting card to talk about would be Searing Wave. And it would be nice to have, I'm not gonna lie, but what are you cutting for it? You probably want at least 2 to 3 copies to play it reliably, and like, are you taking out 2 to 3 early attackers? Probably not, because you want to go for those early shields. Are you taking out water cards? Again, probably not, because A, you'd be fucking up the color balance, and B, you'd rather be playing from ahead, keeping the board clear, bouncing their creatures 1 by 1, with cards like Spiral Gate and Unicorn Fish. If they manage to build a big enough board for Searing Wave to matter, something has already probably gone wrong. Not to mention, you're playing a 5 mana card without developing any bodies, and this deck is already good against aggro anyway. And I could talk about more possible options, but honestly, the answer most of the time is just, yeah, that card is decent, but what would you cut for it? But do let me know your ideas in the comments, I love reading those, and of course, if you want to play this list, feel free to make it your own. Alright, let's talk matchups. What does this deck do well and what does it do poorly? Well, we talked about this throughout the video, but with cards like Cookpogon, triggers like Aqua Surfer, with tempo plays like Spirogate and Unicorn Fish, this deck is pretty solid against other aggressive decks. It doesn't crush aggro, don't get me wrong, but you will have a 55, 60, maybe even 70% win rate against it depending on the specifics of the list you are facing. As for slower decks, well, here's where it depends. Against decks that rely on blockers like Hydra Hurricane or even Light Dark Nature Control, unsurprisingly this deck does pretty well thanks to Screwdriver Paladin and all the bounce. But against heavy late game decks like Forbos Control or Fortress Burn, well, it's general card game knowledge that the faster you go the better, and as I've mentioned before, this list is not as fast as something like Fire Nature Rush, so it's no surprise that it doesn't perform as well against those slower decks. Against Fortress Burn you're still fine, I'd say the matchup is around even depending on the specifics of the list, but FN Rush has like 70% win rate against that deck, so going down from that to even is quite a step down. And against Forbos Control, well, that deck is already decent against FN Rush, so unsurprisingly it will do even better against Red Paladin. I would even go as far as saying that Forbos is your worst matchup, at least among mainstream decks, but that being said, it's still winnable. Probably sitting at around 40% or slightly below that depending on the specifics, so far from hopeless. And I think that's pretty much it. That was an in-depth look at Red Paladin. I wholeheartedly recommend playing this deck, it's quite easy to pick up and pilot, and you might get yourself a win or two by playing it. At any rate, that's all for this video. I've already rambled quite a lot here. Until next time, duelists, take care.